Okay, thank you. I think that the areas you mentioned are very important because we have just developed these areas very recent years, not very long ago. So these are the beginning that we think we may expand the cooperation. We have sent some companies investment in some African countries, and they are successful. We start to have some cooperation with India, but the level is not very high yet. And I think the areas you mentioned, like software, defense, or SME, I agree with you. But there are even other areas that we can cooperate between Vietnam and India, especially the experience between the two countries about the reforms. Up to now, we think that the Indian reform is 15 years after Vietnam, but it's growing quickly, and it's more market-oriented than in Vietnam. Vietnam is moving toward the market, but it seems in the mind of the people is still slow. So we are thinking of a new round of reform in Vietnam. One area that both countries may discuss about the way of cooperation in promoting the reforms between the two countries as well. So I think that there are many different areas, not just a few areas. But it takes time because Vietnam is a small economy, and we follow what we call the gradual approach. So it takes time for the mind of the people to change before we take the action. I think the same like India, you take the look east before you say acting east. It takes some gradual approach. We do not follow the big bang approach like Russia or some East European countries. We change quickly. So in the case, the different areas may move up time after time. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip Vermonte from Indonesia. This is also a question for Professor Do. If I read your slides correctly, Professor Do, if I read your slides correctly, it seems that you are saying that India is more protectionist than ASEAN countries in general, but at the same time, India suffers such a huge trade imbalance with ASEAN countries. So how would you explain this? If it is Donald Trump, India would go around and punish the ASEAN countries because of the trade imbalances. And second, my question to Professor Gosal, on the Quad, ASEAN Quad that you are mentioning, how would you think the other ASEAN countries would respond? Because it resembles the so-called ASEAN minus X mechanism, because you only bring in 2 of ASEAN countries. But somehow the ASEAN minus X mechanism does not apply to political cooperation. In the ASEAN Charter, it is there for economic cooperation. But for the political cooperation, I would guess that the reaction by the other ASEAN countries would be very suspicious about that kind of proposal. Although it's a very interesting proposal, but I think there are complications, not to mention the reaction from China as well. Thank you. Oh, lastly, thank you for bringing the anthropological aspects of ASEAN-India relations, because we, I think, for so many times look at the cooperation from the strategic perspective, not from the cultural anthropological perspective. And what's missing, I think, probably in this conference as well, if we are talking about the way ahead, I'd like to remind everybody around the table that we have a very young population in Southeast Asia. Close to 70% of population in Indonesia is under 40 years old. So they are, I don't know about India, I suspect it's the same. So they are the ones with more they are technologically savvy, so to speak, population. And the consequences of which we don't understand. The economic, the digital economy and so on, which China has been doing very well. And China seems to me well prepared to enter that era compared to most of us in ASEAN as well as in India, I think.
So just two things after this conference for perhaps future reflection. First is, I guess, India and ASEAN and others will have to think what are the political implications of rise of China. One clear implication that I see that it is affecting the unity within regional organizations as they existed. And there are several. Now, is it happening by design? Is it happening by accident? That is for each organization to reflect upon. Second, here one heard this concept of historical claims vis-a-vis the established global order, which is rule-based. Personally, I think we should all, academicians, banish this idea of historical claims, which has very little salience. Because once we talk of nation-states, and especially where would these historical claims stop? Will it stop with one island? Will it extend to land? And India and ASEAN, which are linked by historical and civilizational links, I guess it will open a Pandora's box. Each one of us will have claims on each other, extending right up to I don't know where. So I think it is best to banish this thought from global discourse as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Quickly, please.
I would like to first say I do not say that India is more protection. But in practice, India tax rate is much higher than ASEAN countries. So with the free trade area agreement, the Indian government accepted to reduce over 90% of the tax rates. That's why the trade between the two economies of ASEAN and India is much better. So that's something I do not say about protection, but I say that the difference. So it is more convenient today. The second is that, for example, Indian is moving with the reform. And one of the difficulties is that the privatization of the state enterprises. They are so much subsidized, they do not want to change because they get more subsidies and they do not work hard. They just get from that. We have the same thing in Vietnam. We do not use the word privatization like India. We use equitization because we feel it's difficult to get the subsidies reduced for the people who already got high subsidies. So that's the difficulties. So in that case, I think that in India you have a dynamic private sector. But at the same time, you have some sectors that, because of the history, that it takes time to reduce, to make it more convenient for business, like some ASEAN countries, that they do not have the subsidized sector like as big as Vietnam and India, or they do not have such a big centralized planning management. So, thank you.
You know, when I spoke about this Asian Quad, I didn't mean it as a kind of a alliance kind of a thing. It's a kind of a caucus kind of a thing, a formation where they can coordinate some of their foreign and defense and economic policies. And, you know, I know ASEAN may not like this kind of things, but since it is not part of ASEAN, it is a separate kind of a thing that I've been talking about, a kind of a sort of, informal discussions among these four countries, because, within ASEAN it becomes difficult for someone to talk about certain issues. Now, outside ASEAN, it is much easier to talk on these issues. And I'm not involving, that's why, the Western countries. It's among only the Asian countries. If, US and other countries are present, then of course it becomes a difficult kind of a situation. Thank you.
Well, we have already gone into about 15-20 minutes of our lunch hour. Oh, almost half an hour, I think. What remains for me to do is to thank our distinguished panelists for their excellent presentations by acclamation. And over to Dr. Prabir Dey.
Sir, thank you very much. Excellent session. So we break for lunch and come back at 1:45. Enjoy the lunch. Thank you, sir. Please. The session is on ASEAN-India economic relations. And the session will be chaired by Ambassador Mohan Kumar, our Vice Chairman. And we have 6 eminent panelists, Professor Batra, Carlos Tabunda from Manila, Mr. Rajiv Kher, our distinguished fellow and former Commerce Secretary, Ambassador Biren Nanda, and Pranab Kumar is with the regional head of International Trade Policy of the CII. With that, sir, over to you, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I don't think I need to say too much because we have people who have dealt with this subject hands-on. So I prefer to hear from them. And if you allow me just a couple of remarks, just by way of setting the ball rolling, if you like, I would also suggest two people like Rajiv Kher, who I think are far more qualified than any of us in terms of dealing with the subject, Ambassador Biren Nanda, Pranav Kumar, Amita Batra, and Carlos Tabunda. If we can forget the achievements part, because that was thoroughly discussed in the morning. I don't know how many of you were there in the morning. So just to make it meaningful to the audience, forget the achievements. We are all absolutely in agreement with you that those achievements are outstanding and stellar, and that ASEAN-India relationship has gone from strength to strength. I sound like a Foreign Service officer myself. But anyway, I had to say this. And then I think it would be good, and Rajiv, I hope you agree with me, that we talk of the next phase. And in talking of the next phase, my pointed questions to panelists who choose to respond, or that's your prerogative as the speaker. One, why is our utilization rate abysmally low in the FTA? That is a question I have. I haven't been able to find the answer. Secondly, after many, many years of operation of the FTA, are we any closer to achieving the following objectives? Forget even about exports and imports, because that would be a terribly mercantilist way of looking at things. Are we closer to being part of the global value chain? That ASEAN is so central? Because I thought that was one of the objectives, Are our products more in conformity with TBT and SPS so that at least we export to the rest of the world? And last but not least, access to technology, which you guys have, ASEAN. So this is one question I have. As far as the services and investment is concerned, I will leave it to speakers, but I think our permanent gripe has been that it is not very different from what it was before, in spite of having detailed visa categories and so on. So that is another area, apart from the fact that it is not yet fully implemented, as I understand it. 2 countries are holding out. So the question then is, as the geopolitical, geostrategic partnership moves forward, ASEAN and India, and we all agree that that has to move on, my existential question, if you like, is, can the economic trade investment partnership keep up? I'm worried about that. Can it keep up with this fast-changing nature of the geopolitical or the geostrategic relationship? Because East is going to be extremely important for a variety of reasons. There is an elephant in the room. I don't want to talk about it. You all know which country I'm referring to, and that was also mentioned by I think there was one speaker I was telling those who did not come in the morning that our friend from Cambodia, who spoke very eloquently, I thought, Professor Ambassador, that, and those kind of questions have to be raised in a think tank kind of format, such as the one we have. So with those few words, it's a great pleasure and honor to be chairing a panel as distinguished as this. I'm happy to be not so distinguished so that I can listen and learn. So without much ado, can I call on Mr. Rajiv Kher? I don't think he needs any introduction at all, former Commerce Secretary, distinguished fellow with the RIS, but really somebody, I think, who is more than qualified to answer at least some of the questions I posed. Rajiv, over to you. Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan Kumar, distinguished lady and gentlemen on the dais, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to be participating in this session and sharing some thoughts on a subject which is going to be discussed in and out during these next few days, and is extremely relevant in the context in which Mr. Mohan Kumar mentioned the emerging politico-economic scenario, global economic scenario that we see. I have consciously not tried to get into the strategic dimensions of India-ASEAN relationship, because that is something which will be discussed again and again on many occasions. But clearly, when we talk of trade and investment or trade and economic relations, we cannot avoid having a clear focus on the fact that it is a strategic dimension of this relationship which drives at times the agenda. And though there is a strong economic complementarity in this relationship,